Hi, everyone. This is Level Up Your Career. It's a panel on Staff Plus Engineering. For those that somehow ended up in this room and don't know, staff engineering is a role that happens beyond the sort of terminal senior engineer role that happens in tech companies. And specifically, an interesting thing about the staff engineer title, the Staff Plus engineer role, is that it's often seen as a completely different set of responsibilities and skills, and not just sort of a logical continuation of senior. And as a result, folks find it hard to break into staff. They find it hard to switch roles once they're at the staff level. Managers find it hard to work with Staff Plus engineers or hire them. And so we all had the opportunity to work together and with Clint Gibler of TLDRsec to collect about a dozen stories of Staff Plus engineers and advice on the role in the security industry. And thankfully, these folks were kind enough to panel today. I'm Rami. I'm a infrastructure and cloud security engineer at Figma and infrequent contributor to TLDRsec. With me today, we have Lee, who is a principal security engineer at Microsoft and mostly has worked at companies that start with A. You can check out LinkedIn for more information. She's also organizing a bunch of security conferences, including BSides Seattle and the Diana Initiative, which are coming up soon if you like security conferences. We also have Hasnain, who is currently a software engineer at Databricks, and we're excited to talk to him about the sort of role of software engineering in security. And previously, he was doing a lot of work in fuzzing and dynamic analysis at Meta. And finally, Kurt is our final panelist, and Kurt is a security researcher at the staff level at SemGrep, who make a stack analysis tool. And his fun fact is that he likes carnivorous plants. So, find him in the hallway afterwards and ask him about that. Without further ado, I want to do a little bit of audience participation. I can't see you, so this is mostly you participating with yourselves. Enjoy. Just going to do a quick show of hands on a few things to sort of get a poll of the room and help you all look around and see who you're here with. So first off, can I get a show of hands, and I'm going to include the panelists here, who here has spoken at a conference before? Wow, that's a lot of hands. One of the best parts about B-Sides, right, is we have a lot of participants. Similarly, who's published a blog post of any kind? Who's released or maintained an open source project? Awesome, fewer hands there, takes a lot of work. Who here's been a manager? Fair amount of managers in the room, great to see. And then who has a degree, a college degree of any sort? Who has a CS degree specifically, or maybe security, right? And who has graduate degrees? So this is really great for me, especially because part of this panel is all about having really different profiles and experiences of security. Lee is a principal security engineer, Hasnain does software engineering and security, and Kurt does research. So we're really excited to show all the ways you can get into security, all the things you can do inside and outside work to be successful and grow your career, and really just talk a lot about this role and hopefully get some questions from you and follow up after. We're all very happy to take questions outside this talk as well if you're stuck in your career looking to get unblocked, looking to figure out how to succeed as a staff engineer, or really just sort of bond with other folks going through those challenges. I guess for the first question, I just want to say in the preamble, I said staff engineer is a different role than just, a step beyond senior with different responsibilities. And I love to just starting with Kurt, could I get just a little bit from each of you on what you think about the staff engineer role and what makes it different?
Sure, I can start. Can folks hear me okay? Yes? Cool, awesome. So kind of what I see about staff engineers kind of being sort of a specialist problem solver is kind of where I have kind of made my bed. And it's I focus on the things that only I can do, either via combinations of experience or localized expertise or things of that nature, and then aggressively delegating down things that don't require my attention to people who can also do it and may benefit themselves from doing that task. And that is a skill that takes a while to kind of generate and perfect.
And that last bit's mentorship, which I'm sure we'll be touching on a lot here. Hasnain?
Sure. Can everyone hear me fine? Cool. So I think for me, staff engineering is really about ownership. At the end of the day, I'm here to solve business problems and move the company forward. And part of the role of staff engineering is you're not allowed to take any excuses. You're signed up to help the org do something. You have to get it done. Whether that's getting your hands dirty, leading a team, doing a lot of collaboration, project management, it doesn't matter. That's the ownership that we need to take to help move things forward.
Okay, I have a slightly different take. So I think of it as this weird role that's sort of a combination of engineering and technical program management. I think you have to be able to lead really large, complex problems and solve them, and possibly on your own, and possibly show, to Hasnain's point, business impact before you can get more folks involved. So I think it's kind of an interesting sweet spot if you have both of those skill sets.
Awesome, thank you all. And so we've mentioned that this is a role, but it's also importantly to a lot of people a title. And one thing I like to think about, because I'm sure we have people in this room who might be doing this kind of work without the title that goes along with it. And maybe there are folks who have the title and don't yet feel like they're doing the work. And I'm curious, maybe Hasnain, to start with you, do you think the title matters? Do you think there's impact to getting that staff engineer title, or is it more about the work you do, or some mix?
I think for me, it's mostly about the work I do, but it varies a lot based on company. At my previous employer, Meta, titles were private, so it was definitely easier because you could show it and get recognition based on the work that you've done. But from what I've heard from peers, if you work at a company where titles are important, then people do want to see you have that title before they sort of let you push forward in that role. So I think it is context dependent.
Yeah, and anyone else have a thought there?
I have a potentially lukewarm to spicy take on this.
Okay, we'll measure.
Titles absolutely matter, and the people who tell you titles don't matter have nice titles and nice positioning within the industry. This is almost universally true, especially for underrepresented folks in the industry. If you are anything beyond what is considered the industry default human, you absolutely need that title to be taken seriously in a lot of rooms. So absolutely, title is important.
Awesome.
Yeah, I guess I would say that the title lets you in the room. It's not like you're doing any different work, but you don't have to fight for that place. So that's why I think it matters. But I agree with you. It totally matters.
Yeah, and being in the room is something I feel like we all talk about a lot, and with that comes meeting burden. So maybe we'll touch on that in a bit. Okay, so you talked about mentorship, Kurt, but as the reverse, I know you've talked and thought a lot about how sponsorship and mentorship helped you in your journey to staff. Could you share a little bit about how managers might be able to help someone or peers or mentors get to this level?
Sure. So I made it to a staff title in what is arguably record time. I feel for the average is 7 to 10 years usually. I think I did it in 7 flat, might have been 6. And this is largely because I made all of my career choices based on mentorship opportunities. My very first career job was a large e-signature company, pre-IPO. I was offered 2 positions. One was a general engineering role, and the other one was with the hiring manager who did my phone screen. And I was like, I don't care about the job. I want to work for this person. And that got me connected with my next mentor, who is still a mentor to me today. And that got my my next job after that, where I built an AppSec program from scratch. And that connected me with Clint, who got me my current researcher job. So I've basically, mentorship has built my career in its entirety. So picking good mentors is super, super important. And unfortunately, I don't really have any concrete advice for you on how to find those people. It's kind of it when you see it type deal. And
come to BSides, go to Hallway Con,
Yeah.
talk to people. I think that's all I can give you there. Yeah, anyone else have experiences of mentorship that maybe unlocked something for you in your career, or no? Soul successes. Yeah. No, and it's interesting because that's what this is all about, which is I think mentorship can unlock career opportunities, and also you can make opportunities for yourself and be successful. Can you maybe, starting with Lee, talk about how you see your role as a staff engineer now the other direction, giving mentorship and giving sponsorship, and what that might look like?
Yeah, so I totally agree that mentorship and sponsorship can open doors, and any chance you get to do to help someone, you should. I do a lot of mentoring. I probably do too much, honestly. Like, I will always sign up if someone reaches out, even people I don't know. I'm happy to like do those conversations. I just think it's so critical to people's success. And I wish I had had mentors and sponsors, and I didn't. So for me, it's really important to give back, to open the door for someone else.
So I'll echo a bit of both of these points. I think for me, mentorship was critical in getting where I am. But at the same time, so I try to give back, like Lee suggested. I think one of the key areas I found is like, you want to find people that are hungry for mentorship and will like respect your time, but also put in the work. There's a lot you can do, then you can see those people honestly outstripping you and doing way better than you could ever do in your own time. And that feeling is just something like you can't beat. And like, there's a lot of like really amazing people out there in the field and getting into the field. And we have a lot to do as the senior folk in the industry to help them grow.
Awesome. Kurt, anything on the other direction?
Just to add to the previous two responses, if you have someone like that you are mentoring and they are hungry and they are putting in the work, you absolutely do owe it to them to like go to the mat for them. And I have a current mentee who may or may not be in the audience here, who I have done this for this week around like, you know, org stuff and promotions and things like that. And you have to, like, I am, due to my experience, I have the political pull and, you know, title and all that stuff to be able to get into those rooms to have those conversations. I owe it to this person to do that.
Yeah. And so some of the things we're talking about here are mostly non-technical, actually, which I would make a note of. And so some of the questions come up, which is like, is this a non-technical role? How much is sponsorship and mentorship? And then what makes it different than being a manager? And actually, like, Hasnain, you've managed folks and you've come back the other way. Can you talk about maybe, you know, the differences you found in those roles, or what you find compelling about right now working maybe outside of management with some of these responsibilities?
Sure. So I will caveat by saying I was a TLM or technical manager, which is a bit of mix of both when I was a manager.
Do you mind just explaining that to folks who haven't worked at a company with that role?
Sure. So I would say my responsibilities were as a tech lead of the team, driving projects and stuff, but also having reports and doing the people management aspect. So bounded to a small team. I would say the main differences for me, like as a manager, my focus was much more on the people, on supporting their career growth, on helping them find the right projects and excelling as a team. But as a staff engineer, it's a little bit more on the technical side. So sort of, I still work very closely with my manager to ensure the people on the team are getting the right feedback, that they're growing appropriately, but providing more technical input into the direction of the team. Like I'd say the main difference is like as a manager, if I'm doing the technical decisions, I'm doing it wrong. But as an engineer, if I'm not doing any of the technical decisions, I'm doing it wrong.
Awesome. Kurt, Lee, have you considered management? Like what keeps you working as an individual contributor?
So I've done management, and I do agree that a lot of the time is spent, you know, coaching others. The interesting thing to me is, as a principal security engineer, I spend a lot of time coaching others. So I think the main difference is I don't have to write the performance review, which is thrilling to me personally. But I think, honestly, I do just as much coaching and helping people figure out their career paths as I did as a manager. Why didn't I want to be a manager? I don't like doing like really, it comes down to that for me. I just don't like it. I'd rather just drive strategy and direction as an IC.
Yeah.
I will plus one much of what Lee just said. I tried managing. I was a terrible manager. So like some people are good at the paperwork part, and like, you know, you have to be a person with like super high conscientiousness and like attention to detail and stuff like that. And my brain doesn't work. Like the reason I'm a researcher is because I go chase butterflies down through like RFCs and specifications and stuff like that. Like that's why I have the job I have. That makes me a really bad manager because it makes me super inconsistent. I am happy to offer like career direction and some of that like, you know, squishy political advice to mentees, but like, can I help you do the like how to climb the ladder at your current org? No, not really. Like I can give you broad strokes, but like I'm just bad at it. So,
Okay, so maybe next question not for Kurt. Hasnain Lee, like, one of the big things that happens is folks find themselves stuck at senior. I think I was just having a conversation last night with someone, a manager, who was talking about how their report couldn't get that staff level promotion, right? Was doing the work and wasn't getting the promotion. And I'm curious, like, as folks already in that role, what would your advice be? Or maybe how do you help folks navigate that sort of blockage in their career progression?
Yeah. So oddly, I was right there not that long ago, like just stuck at senior, being like, so I've been doing principal work. Can I have my promo? Thanks. So like my suggestion is, if you are stuck, own your own destiny, right? Like there are other people hiring. If you're doing the work and you have the body of work and you can speak to it, somebody else is going to give you that role. So that was my approach. It worked out perfectly for me.
I think relatedly, to add to that, if you, like for me, I was also stuck for a while, and it was, okay, am I doing staff level work? Is there something missing where I think I'm doing staff level work, but my management chain or other folks don't? That was one thing, like just go and ask for feedback, like say, okay, hey, what am I missing? Once those expectations are clear, try to like work towards them, but then also keep getting feedback and holding yourself accountable. Like it is not enough to just do the work and ship a project, but it's more about the intangibles. How do you get everyone together? How do you set a longer term vision than just doing the work you're assigned? Because at the end of the day, as a staff engineer, you're supposed to drive bigger things forward than just being given work to do.
Yeah. And so let's say there are folks out there who are stuck at senior level. They're trying to take ownership of their destiny. They're doing the work. Do you think that there's a time at which you will be more successful getting that promotion by leaving your job, or do you think that you're more successful sticking with a job for that promotion? Because I know I talk to all sorts of senior engineers who are really torn between investing in the company they've worked at and built this reputation and understanding that maybe there isn't a path or a role for them there.
I think it depends on how patient you are. I'll admit I'm really impatient, like I'm wildly impatient, like it's a huge weakness for me. And I wasn't willing to wait. Like I finally said, I'm not going to stick around. Like I made that very clear to my management. It's what I wanted. It's what I expected. And when it didn't come to fruition, I was like, I'm out. And it was a very honest conversation. So that's the other thing. I would be very honest with somebody about what you want and how you want to grow. You've got to let that person know, because otherwise they may not even realize it's what you're looking for. I don't know if you have anything.
No, said it like that. Okay, so something that's come up already a little bit, and I always am interested in talking about, is we talk about this staff engineering role often in terms of scope. I think especially among staff engineers, right? If you're a senior engineer, maybe you're responsible for work you do, a team does. As a staff engineer, it's normally an area of the business, right? We're all at very different sized companies, and a team, an area of the business, a product, a department is vastly different. And I don't know if maybe starting with Lee, who I think works at our largest employer represented, like, do you think there's a difference in the role at big companies? Is it a difference in sort of really seniority? Like, is a staff engineer at a tiny startup doing the same job in the same way? What's the comparative?
Well, I mean, I think it's like the same comparison you have to a small company versus a large company, right? Like, they're different beasts and there's different problems. The part of the reason that I work at very large companies is I love the complexity of the problems. Like, they're really hard. I love like getting to scale. Like every time you're asking, how do I scale? How do I scale? How do I scale? And it's just, for me, a very different like atmosphere and an environment. But fundamentally, I think it's just they're just different companies. I don't think one is better than the other. I don't think the role, I think each staff engineer role is actually kind of unique and is at a certain place at the company that they need that person, right? And so I think it's really hard to compare personally. I don't know if you guys have. I mean, you've worked at both large and small companies, so.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a second pass. I just switched from a very large company to a reasonably large company, like
mid-sized.
Mid-sized, yeah. So I think there's parts of the role that stay the same. Like, as a staff engineer, you're on the hook for business impact. And I think it's just the ways that you need to get those done are different. Like at my previous role, it was, leading a team of engineers to build software, set the vision, and then work closely with our partners, both within our org and across different orgs to like meet their needs. In my current role, our team is much smaller, and we have a lot more things to do. So it's a lot more about building relationships with teams where we need to get them to do things on our behalf, understanding their roadmaps, understanding where we can contribute, and then building a lot more stuff on my own. But at the end of the day, that North Star of here's what the company needs, and I'm helping drive that forward is what is important.
Yeah. And I mean, Kurt, you're in research. You're almost a solver archetype, which is an archetype that sort of goes deep on a single problem. Does this resonate for you, or is this just divorced from your experience?
My experience is complicated. So my first couple jobs were mid-sized company, like pre-IPO mid-sized company, post-IPO mid-sized company, and then when I was hired at SemCraft, it was still under 50 people, and I had known most of the team since it was like 15 people. So I went from mid-sized to itty bitty teeny tiny company. So the research part is like we're in a space that has a bunch of like big industry-sized problems that don't have great solutions. Like I work on the supply chain part of our product, and like based on the plethora of other companies in the space trying to solve it, no one has like a silver bullet yet. Like there's a reason there's 50 companies, because there's like 50 different strategies, and no one is a clear winner yet, really. So it's kind of different. And the other thing is that based on even the two mid-sized companies I was at had wildly different problems that needed to be solved, and wildly different scaling problems, just based on like who their customers were, what their infrastructure was like, how old their code bases were, relatively, like their like speed of shipping, and there's just so many variables that like staff engineer positions really are like super unique. So I guess like a lot of this like resonates like a little bit, but again, I'm off in the weeds looking for like solutions to problems we don't like have solutions for. So I don't know. I will stop there.
Yeah. So Kurt, you mentioned doing the supply chain product is sort of a big research problem, and Lee, you mentioned that there are like this concept of big problems. Can I get like Hasnain, Lee, an example of what a big problem is in your sort of staff engineering role, whether currently, historically, in whatever way you can share it in this context?
Sure, I can take a stab. So in my previous role, I was basically working on fuzzing. But the problem that we were trying to solve was that we had like memory corruption bugs in native code. And that's sort of what we took ownership of. There was people attacking that from different angles, but we said, hey, we do dynamic analysis, so fuzzing is a natural fit for this. But at the end of the day, our focus was just on, are we solving the end goal of like reducing the attack surface in native by finding these bugs and preventing them up front?
Yeah, and so was that mostly technical solutions? Was that mostly about getting other teams to use your platform? Like, what's the shape of that as a staff
both,
engineer?
I would say. Technical innovation, so that we could actually find those types of bugs in our code bases, and then finding the people that could most benefit from our stuff. So it was on us to like see, okay, which teams would most benefit from this, which code bases were most at risk, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so I work on breach preparedness, which sounds simple until you realize that you're working with service teams who...
It doesn't sound simple.
It's
I don't
not
know if
simple.
anyone else just panicked, but...
In my head, it sounded simple when I took the job. Maybe I should reframe that. So a lot of mine is looking at tooling that will help understanding like problems we have in our current tools that create issues, and then process. So it's a weird space to be in, I'll be honest. And I think a lot of people are used to, blue teams practicing response. And I'm really much more interested in how does a service team practice response. So that's how I spend my time. And I think we're maybe have the Slido stuff. Maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. We have more questions prepared, but feel free to get some questions in the Slido, or if you can't figure that out, and I can see you in the first 4 rows, you can throw up a hand and yell at me. That being said, I think the first question that came in, maybe I don't know what order these are in, is trying to push us on a point that we sort of skipped right over, which is really how do you find mentors? You're driven, you're interested in growing your career. I guess the way I would sort of add color to this is, do you think that you should be looking for mentors inside your company or outside? Do you think you should be looking for mentors with your specific role? Like, is there a profile you should look for? Do you DM them on Twitter? Do you walk up to them at the conference? Do you send them a cold email? Like, what advice can we actually give people to help them get access to this resource that exists in the community?
I have a very long story time answer for this if no one else wants to
Do you have
go
a short
first.
story time answer for this? Kurt?
I can attempt to bridge the story time answer.
All right, I'll put you on the clock.
All right. TLDR, I have done all of these things and with reasonable success. Like, I met Alejandro Munoz and why can't I remember his name?
We don't do mentorship for the fame people. It's okay.
YSO serial developer whose name I'm forgetting. Anyway, I met him and Munoz and Alexander Morosh at DEF CON 27, and talked deserialization for 45 minutes because I ran into them at DEF CON. I have messaged people on Twitter. I have, but the best advice I actually got from my dad, which when I started my big kid corporate job, was he was like, go identify the people who are not in leadership positions now, but it'll be in leadership positions in 2 to 3 years, because those people are still accessible and they will have much more power and influence when you need them to. Yeah. So what I did is when I started, I met the director of AppSec and I just had coffee with him literally every Monday, and we would just talk security. I was not in security at the time, but we talk about auth bypass Monday, and because anyway, different stories. But that is where I got one of my super rock solid mentorships I still have to this day, and that was an in-company thing. So if you're in a large enough organization to find these sorts of people, absolutely do go find the people who are 1 to 2 rungs ahead of you on the career ladder, because you can still have informal conversations with them, and they will end up big decision makers.
Yeah.
And when you're in mid-career, when you really need this kind of mentorship.
So Kurt, you mentioned 45 minutes of talking, getting coffee regularly if you're inside the company. Also, we're all in roles where I think people put one-on-ones on our calendar. If you are not putting one-on-ones on people's calendar you want to have a bigger relationship with, you should just do that. Other people will. You're falling behind if you're not putting yourself out there. But I think what often gets people tripped up is they have that first meeting and they don't know how to turn that into a relationship. And I'm wondering if Hasnain or Lee, what is the next step, right? You've met someone you think is really interesting or really helpful or insightful. What do you do about it?
I'll make a first pass at this one. I found it useful, say, okay, I am meeting this person because I want to learn X or grow my connections in product Y, and I just talk about it. I just open up and say, hey, I'm looking for advice in this area. I want to grow. I'm being respectful of your time. So what are things I can do for you that help me learn more about this field or that can help me grow? And I found that to be a good end. Especially when I was really junior, people would love to delegate and get brownie points for that and get their stuff done, right? So it's a win-win situation. And then over time, you can just be hey, I wanted your advice on X as a quick question. It doesn't always have to be a one-on-one or a long meeting. It can just be an email after a certain amount of time, and then that builds that relationship for when you really need it.
Yeah. Anything to add, Lee?
I guess, I think about the relationships I have with folks who are mentoring, and one of the things that we tend to do, at least in the first meeting, is we don't actually talk about anything besides just what's going on? What are your interests? What do you do? Very much break the ice, because that gives you the in to then have the follow-up conversation. The only thing I would say about the inside or outside the company, I just wanted to kind of touch on that. If you're at a large company, I would say it's absolutely essential to have somebody who can go to bat for you. So it's the person who was terrible at it for a long time. But I do think it's actually wise. I also think it's really helpful to have somebody outside the company to give you a perspective, because it's too easy to have blinders on and just get very sucked into your corporate culture, which is, beneficial for growing, but you do need that other perspective to grow even further. So I just wanted to do a plug for that.
Yeah, someone actually asked a related question, which is, I think we're talking about mentorship right now, but we've also mentioned sponsorship. And inside your company, is sponsorship something you should seek? Is sponsorship something you should expect from your manager? like what's the role of sponsorship in your growth in your career?
It's something you should expect from a manager, but realistically, you're not likely to get it, and you should not like wait for it to come around. So it is something you actively need to seek and say, okay, hey, I need someone to back me up in this area, or someone to like give me kudos in the room where it matters for stuff I'm shipping. And you want to set clear expectations for that.
Awesome.
Can I add something to that real quick?
Yeah, of course.
This is absolutely one of those you know it when you see it indicators. Like someone who is willing to sponsor you and go to bat for you is an indicator of an excellent manager and mentor.
Awesome. And I think we, like you mentioned, asking good questions, sort of following up, and allowing your manager to like, or your mentor to delegate down. But we had a related question, right? A lot about mentorship here. Like, you all have a lot of people probably seeking your mentorship, or at least like Lee, I know you and I have talked about sort of a lot of mentees. And what does a like good mentee's engagement look like? What's a good mentee's sort of contribution to that relationship look like?
It's an interesting question. I think just come with like an openness to learn and an engagement from like what you want from that person. This is probably why I'm actually bad the opposite direction, is I actually didn't know what I wanted from the people that were helping me. Like to do everything on my own. I seriously don't recommend that, but like just tell them what you're like, be really direct. Like I would like help, growing my technical skills. I would like help growing my, leadership skills. Like the folks at our level can help you with both, but we don't really know what you need unless you tell us. Like we cannot read your mind.
Yeah. And something I think Hasnain mentioned, I always think about is like situations and cases. Have you guys found that mentorship gets easier if someone's bringing you like a specific problem or situation or skill? I know I found that like a lot of times you get these inbound emails that are like, hey, please teach me security, and just like, yes, read TLDRSec and like come back to me with a specific topic or question, and I'm happy to help. But I'm wondering, like, have you seen that sort of realm of interaction?
My current mentee brings a bolded list to all of our one-on-ones, and that is incredibly helpful because I am here as a resource, but like I need you to guide me with what you need from me, because I can rabbit hole down like, let's talk about the URL specification for an hour. So you need to ask me for what you need.
I would also say, like, you have to be comfortable with like, I tend to do this to people. Like, you can say, I want to learn X, and then I'm going to pick at that a bit. Like, why do you want to learn X? Tell me. Like, I'm going to ask you just as many questions as you're going to ask me. I'm probably actually going to ask you more. So that's what I mean by come prepared, because it's a conversation. It's back and forth. I'm not just going to give you a path and say, go, because I don't think that works well, personally.
Yeah. Awesome. We talked about like unblocking path to staff, advocating for yourself, but concretely, is there anything you have seen really work for someone who's a year or two out that they should focus on? I think there are probably some folks in the room who are, don't feel like they're trying to fight for the promotion, but maybe they're fighting for the packet, and like what that might look like.
Sure. I think trying to identify that North Star early and say, hey, this is the direction I want to go in, this is the strategy I want to develop and build. Like, put yourselves in the shoe of your manager 2 years from now who's saying, okay, I'm promoting X because they have done A, B, C and demonstrated that they're at that level. And you want to start writing that. And like, if you can't write it, ask for feedback. Like, see, what am I missing? What is like an example of a staff appropriate project or deliverable? And work towards that. Once you have a clear idea, then you can go about executing on it.
I mean, I've seen people hyper-focus on deep technical skills and completely ignore what does the business need. Yeah. So I think, like, go after those deep technical skills, but remember at this level, like, if you don't have the leadership skills, it's going to be very hard for your manager to make the case.
Awesome. Yeah. So the next sort of highly rated question here is about the fact that staff engineers are often involved in planning and road mapping and maybe not greenfield work, but greenfield determination of what the work should be. What do you do to sort of identify the next big problem you or your team or your sphere of influence should tackle? And is this a process that is, internal only? Is it benchmarking? Is it based on some framework? I think, Kurt, you're in a bit of a different role in this like deep solver mode. What's your process for finding big problems in research?
So my employer is a static analysis security tool. Our customers are AppSec people, basically. I was an AppSec person. I built a program basically from scratch for a $1 billion company. So I am deeply familiar with the problems that like are sort of like ideal customer profiles trying to solve. And so I use that as my North Star for like, okay, because again, as we've mentioned several times now, technical skills are table stakes. What's really the differentiator for staff is being able to connect that to business outcomes. Because the people who are deciding whether or not you are a staff engineer are people who are deeply, deeply concerned with business outcomes. So you can do technical wizardry all day long, and if the business doesn't care, it doesn't matter. So that's kind of what I use to define research is like, okay, what are the problems that like my peers, because I still have a bunch of peers from my career that are all AppSec people. And so I text them like, hey, what do you hate right now? And if I get 4 of the same response, I go, that's interesting. Let's go look at that. So that's kind of, I'm going to stop there, but that's kind of.
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's alluding to the idea of like a peer network becoming really important at this level, especially if you're in maybe a smaller company where there aren't 15 staff engineers to.
I lean on Clint a lot.
I lean on Clint a lot too, and I don't even share an employer. Hasnain, Lee, anything to sort of talk about how you go about identifying like work to be done, road mapping, what big problems there are to tackle?
I'd say basically the same thing, but I've done it in an internal company context. Is like you want to talk to the teams that you're working with and just understand what their roadmaps are, what their biggest concerns are, and then drive like what you want to do based on that. Especially in security, we're here to serve the business. So you want to understand what the product teams are building, why they're building it, what the broader context of it is, and understand how to secure that and go from there. And you should be meeting these people regularly anyway, even when it's not planning time. So that when planning time comes, you already have a good idea of what you're going to do.
I would say this is how I do it. I look at data and I look for gaps. Like those are my 2 go-to models. Like I look at the data, I see what it's telling me, and then I try to suss out, is there a gap somewhere in our business strategy that I can go after and build something to have impact? That sounds really simple. It's not, but that's been my go-to. I recommend it.
Awesome. On a road mapping planning note, we've talked about business impact being important both to get to staff level, to succeed. How do you quantify or qualify the impact of a security project, right? Like you're looking at the data, what data are you looking at? For research, how would you ever sort of compare against things you aren't exploring, right? Opportunity cost. Anyone have a silver bullet for security metrics?
Nope.
Nope.
What do you do to paper over that gap, though? Like the security industry knows there's a gap in quantification. Maybe you're at Netflix where they're actually doing fair or risk quantification, but most shops aren't doing that. Like, how do you sell security then, or security impact?
We try to come up with at least project appropriate level metrics. I'm in the bug detection space, so we look at how many PRs are we checking, how many bugs are we actually finding, how many actually do we let through. And then try to work backwards from there. And we say, okay, we're going to reduce this thing by 30% this quarter. That's one way of approaching it, and that's roughly what I try to look at. There's always some metric. You can't say there's nothing.
Yeah. Lee, any big company wisdom for us?
I mean, a lot of big companies are going to use OKRs. I am a big fan of writing objective statements. I do X so that Y happens. Right? And then what are the metrics that will tell me the why, right? Like, and it could be trend analysis, it could be raw data. I mean, it just really depends on the problem, but I always have found it much easier if I state the objective, which is, basically the goal in a lot of ways, but really break it down and then just look for what metrics will help me determine whether I'm moving the needle or not.
Yeah, like 2-second question, what's better, a bad metric or no metric?
Ooh.
I pick no metric.
Yeah, Hasnain, no metric?
Yeah.
I actually think a bad metric, because
Awesome.
then you can go down the wrong path, and I've seen that happen a lot. So
There'll be no follow-up here.
Okay.
We're gonna take this offline. Awesome. So we have one question that's sort of floated to the top here, and just so folks know, I am paying attention to thumbs up. So if you are interested in influencing what we talk about here, go for it. There's a question from Brandon, thank you, Brandon, about anti-patterns in trying to reach staff positions, or things you've seen sort of people either hurt their own case or hurt their own progression. Do you have any examples or like what not to do people make?
I have a knee-jerk response. Brilliant jerks. Don't be a brilliant jerk. No one wants to work with a brilliant jerk, and part of staff is working with a whole bunch of other people. If other people don't want to work with you, you will never make it there.
Yeah.
I would say doing a bunch of the work that you're already doing and better, like doing that better, that doesn't matter. If you're continuing to do senior level work at senior level impact, you'll do great, you'll get great ratings, but you will not get promoted to staff because you're not changing the way you work.
I think I mentioned this earlier. The people that I've seen really get stuck are the folks who they just keep developing their tech skills. And again, that's table stakes, as we mentioned earlier. And I keep being like, so you need those leadership skills. Like, listen to the person who tells you, hey, you have this gap here, go chase it down. And I would also say, like, to a point, if you get too technically deep in one area, that can be a problem. Because I do think, especially at large companies, they're looking for people with breadth, not necessarily depth. Like you have actually decent depth, but it's more about understanding the entire of the security domain, not just one specific thing. So like, I've worked in AppSec, I've worked in CloudSec, I've done InfraSec. Like I've tried to do many different domains because that's what's expected.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add one thing I've seen is that if you're reaching for staff level without your manager's buy-in, like we've talked about this, you're going to have a really hard time. And so you should really think about communicating to your manager the things you're doing that you think demonstrate staff level impact and making sure they're aligned. And I've seen some folks really thrash by, talking to their peers about how they're doing staff level work and realizing that work is deeply misaligned with what the business needs or what their manager expects from them. And, unfortunately, it's not just the work that matters. It's talking about it, getting it recognized, and eventually getting promoted and sort of having that pay off for you.
I have one other piece of fatherly wisdom to pass on that I found very
Thank you,
helpful.
Kurt. Please give me fatherly wisdom.
My dad was a Boeing engineer for like 35 years. If you flew here on a 777, he built the wings for that. His biggest piece of advice is the unhappiest people and the least successful people he saw in the corporate world had this did 20 or 30 years of the same year every year. Have a different year every year. And figure out what that means to you and use that as your North Star. You will be successful. I did that. Look where I am now.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think maybe time for a couple more questions. One, let's go through this quickly. I will say I think it's covered in the stories everyone's shared in depth. So if you want to know more, there's a link, and all three of these people have written like narratives of their career and how they got to staff. But give us an example of a project or achievement that unlocked staff for you. Like what was the thing you'd point to and say really, went in the packet and got you the buy-in you needed?
I'll go first. I think for me, it was really making fuzzing a reality. Like when I started working on this problem at my previous employer, we had nothing for it. But then over the course of a couple of years, I built a team around it, and we started being a meaningful part of the way my company did security. And I think just being able to point to that and say, okay, we came from nothing, and now we have this thing, and this exists. And it was broad enough that it was affecting things org or company-wide was the main factor, I would say.
Yeah. Kurt?
I built an AppSec program from scratch by myself at a company with 1,000+ employees and 500 engineers. So a lot of the zero to functional, I think, is going to be kind of a common thread for staff. Like building something new that's like adopted and effective is a big staff feather if you can do it.
Does that carry to big companies, Lee? Because I think there's probably also a lot of staff engineers who are making things work better, which at scale has huge impact, right?
Yeah, but I do think like it's sort of that cross-organizational work that really stands out. You know, when I think about when I was trying to sell myself after leaving one large company to go to another large company, I really talked about these massive programs that I ran across the entire company, and I could talk specifically to the impact that we had by running those. So I think it's I do think cross-org, if you're at a really large company, plays a huge role.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess a last question that we saw float up here. Like, what do you think about roles beyond staff? Is there another role that's a step function like this? Or like, for you personally, what do you see your next step? Where does your career go? You know, as a IC, are you headed into management now, right? Everything ends in management, or?
No. So I'm lucky. I work at a large company. There's a lot of ladder ahead of me. If I were to leave, I've actually given this a lot of thought, because one of my mentees was like, so like, are you happy with where you're at? And I was like, wait, but I'm a principal. Do I have to actually think about, like, that literally went through my head. I was like, do I have to think about this still? And so it forced me to. So I love mentoring for that reason, because it forces you to think about things, right? And I think for me, like, if I were to leave my company, which I'm not saying I have any plans to, I want to be very clear about that.
Recruiters, please do not take note.
Yeah. I would really like to be a technical advisor to a CISO at some point. I think that's a really nice role for me. It's, you know, looking across the business strategically, you're on the leadership team, but again, I don't have to do performance reviews, so I love that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Added to that, yeah, I think similarly, there's a lot of career growth ahead, just doing larger projects, more company-wide impact, and potentially getting slightly more technically like deep in some of the technical stuff that I'm looking at. But also for me personally, like management, like I swung the pendulum once, I might go back again. It really depends on what type of roles exist.
Yeah.
Where I'm at now, there is one ladder beyond where I'm at. There is a principal ladder ahead of where I'm at. I'm probably shooting for something like research architect in terms of like title. Like,
is that a title?
It will be.
Make your own title.
So I really like this sort of like systems, you know, stuff. Like every now and then I'll be like watching a trashy TV show from the early 2000s and like, you know, hands-on keyboard stuff. But like, I really do like that sort of like understanding and like systems view of things. And a lot of research is very like specialist, and like, I know, you know, this language backwards, forwards, and upside down. I know DNS really well. I know cryptography really well. There isn't really a like shape of everything kind of like, where should we send research? Because if you're not familiar with SimGrep, we have a fairly large research team for the size of company we are. So we have a lot of these really smart, really talented researchers, and we need to send them places. And we don't have a great map for that, and I don't know.
So sorry, you're saying we should focus on the business impact of our work?
Yes. TLDR, focus on the business impact of your work.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And so we're all different types of staff engineer. The last question that was asked, and for folks who we didn't answer, a lot of these questions are actually really important and might be even more important to you. Like, find any of us, ask us, talk to us, and talk to all the other really experienced ICs you'll meet this weekend. Last question is sort of, what do you do to make your role legible or understandable or comprehensible? Like, if you were to switch jobs, do you just like throw in a staff engineer application? Like, do I apply for Kurt's job, or is it giving talks at conferences? Like, what's the one thing to do?
One thing.
I frame it in terms of like the business impact again. I'm like, I help make the company more secure, and like I focus on these two flavors of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, all plus one, business impact. Like, I haven't applied for a job my like last 2 or 3 because I was like, they're all in network. Like, hey, like we need someone who does X, and I know through the grapevine or personal experience that you are very good at X. Like, I actually got punted into my current job by my mentor, who was my boss at my last job. He's like, you are an idiot if you don't take this job. So
yeah, have friends and mentors.
Yeah,
who will.
have friends and mentors, and that will solve itself, kind of.
I guess I would just say be able to sell the story, right? Like, so much of this is selling, which I really hate to admit to, because I actually think I'm a terrible salesman. But I think you know your narrative, be able to speak to it, and if someone pushes it back on you, just just keep pushing and keep selling, because that's the value you can add.
Awesome. Thank you all. Always be selling. No. Thanks, folks, for your questions. Again, please feel free to hallway con us. We're always happy to talk more about this. And if anyone's a Staff Plus engineer and wants to share their story, reach out to me. I'm very easy to find. I have a fairly unique name, and happy to promote your story as well so other people can learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please give a round of applause.